Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5. I got a very interesting video topic for you today. It might not be interesting to everybody because it's not knife related, but it's history related. And as you know, I love history. And basically what happened is I stumbled across this video where these people are playing this word association game where they say a word and you say the first thought that comes to mind. And they were playing this with Native Americans. Now, I don't know if these people were paid in any way to give a specific answer, but they were really spreading hate and ignorance, and I really don't like that. And the question is Christopher Columbus evil? In this video, these people would say Christopher Columbus, and the Native Americans would say, "Oh, he's a conqueror. He's evil. He's the reason for everything bad happening to us. They'll flip off the camera and say, F you, Christopher Columbus. I mean, it was really harsh. And, it's just not a cool thing. Um, and keep in mind when we talk about the Native Americans, we're talking about the people native to the United States, the indigenous people to the United States. We're not talking about uh, natives of Mexico. We're not talking about the natives or the indigenous people of Central America or South America or the Caribbean. We're talking about Native Americans. The thing that the Native Americans really need to remember is that Christopher Columbus never stepped foot in North America. Now, they blamed Christopher Columbus for claiming North America and taking something that didn't belong to him. This is a shady subject because Christopher Columbus didn't claim North America specifically. Spain, who Christopher Columbus was representing, Christopher Columbus was Italian. He also spoke Portuguese and Spanish, but he was representing Spain, the Spaniards. Basically, got with the Pope and drew a longitudinal line on the globe and said, from here back belongs to Spain. And the very interesting thing about this treaty, I forget the name of the treaty, I should have looked it up, but they didn't know how much land they were talking about. They didn't know that North America existed. They probably didn't know how big South America was. The map was being drawn at the moment. So, as far as they knew, they were getting a group of islands this big, not continents. And yes, Christopher Columbus did take the Spaniards to the Caribbean, and I think he stepped foot in South America. But when they claimed the land, they didn't know what they were claiming. And the Native Americans also complained that he called dubbed them, coined them Indians, which is true. Christopher Columbus called the indigenous people of the Caribbean and South America Indians. And this is for a very specific reason. He was confused. He thought he was in India. So he called them Indians. I'm sorry the name stuck. But you can't hate a guy for being confused. So if Christopher Columbus never stepped foot in North America, didn't do all these horrible things to the Native Americans, then who is to blame? Well, if you can blame someone from Spain, you can blame Hernan Cortez. I personally have no problem with Hernan Cortez. I think he was very talented at what he did. He never did anything to me, so I have no real big problem with him. Just as I have no big problem with the Romans for conquering the Celts or the Anglo-Saxons or the Gauls or the Goths or whatever. They did nothing to me. But Hernan Cortez conquered the Aztec Empire, which is in modern-day Mexico. And the Aztec Empire was huge. And you might think, well, this is, a big country, Spain, bringing down new technology and the forces of science on this primitive empire and wiping them out. This is not true. Hernan Cortez, if I remember correctly, actually kind of got in trouble for conquering the Aztec Empire. He wasn't supposed to do it. I think it was him trying to make a name for himself. He had 11 ships, 14 horses, and 500 men. A handful of cannon, which I doubt he was able to use because dragging cannon through the jungle deep into Mexico would be a very awkward thing to do. So they probably stayed on the ship. But he had 500 men. He had two translators, one of them male, one of them female. He ended up marrying the female. And he went to the Aztec Empire. He portrayed himself as an ambassador. He negotiated with them. He talked with Montezuma, and he got some gold from them and all that stuff. But the thing is, Hernan Cortez could not, even with firearms and steel swords, could not, with 500 men, conquer the Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire had a standing army, not just 500 men, but thousands of soldiers, and it would have been very difficult, near or impossible, for him and his men to conquer the Aztec Empire without help. He had a crap load of indigenous people of Mexico helping him because the Aztec Empire was huge, but there was also a lot of small groups of indigenous people, small villages and empires and stuff that didn't like the Aztecs because the Aztecs were kidnapping them and sacrificing them, ripping their hearts out and stuff. And so they didn't like the Aztecs. So you got a lot of indigenous people helping Hernan Cortez conquer the Aztecs. This is Mexico. And they eventually started populating Florida and California and Texas and stuff. But who is really to blame for all the crappy stuff that happened to the Native Americans? Well, that would be the British and the Americans. They did all the bad crap to the Native Americans or Indians, whatever you want to call them. And it sucked. It sucked for the Indians. I'm sorry. It sucked. The Americans broke treaties with the Native Americans. The Cherokee actually won a trial, I think, in the Supreme Court, and the president said, "We're not going to honor it." I remember reading about that. But what can we blame on Christopher Columbus? What did Christopher Columbus do besides showing up on an island that ended up saving his life? Well, there was something called the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is called the Columbian Exchange. It's named after Christopher Columbus, although he wasn't in charge of it. And it's basically when Christopher Columbus landed on that island, he started bringing stuff back to Spain. He started bringing back tobacco, animals, exotic fruit. He started bringing that, corn, potatoes later on, and started making its way to Europe. And the exchange part of it, to exchange something is to swap things. The Spaniards brought things to the New World. And some of these things that the Spanish brought were very positive for the indigenous people of the Americas, including North America. And that is pigs, cattle. They introduced horses and alcohol. Which alcohol wasn't such a good thing for the Native Americans, but they liked it. They loved it. But the horses, North, Central, and South America, they loved horses. Horses was awesome. The Native Americans loved horses. The native to South Americans, like in Argentina and stuff, loved horses. Horses was a game changer. Horses made you able to drag heavy pieces of wood, like what you would use to make a teepee. It made it possible to effectively hunt the bison or buffalo. They're technically not buffalo, they're bison. The Indian word for it is tatanka. But Europeans called them buffalo, but they're not. But with these horses, they were able to chase down buffalo and hunt them effectively. They were able to hold animals, drive them to places, effectively domesticate animals such as, llamas and alpaca and stuff in South America. So horses were awesome to the indigenous people of the Americas, and last time I checked, the indigenous people loved them. So you know, you might you might be confused about who Christopher Columbus is, but you should thank him. Now, what negative things did Christopher Columbus bring to the Americas that didn't? Let me see how I can phrase this. The Spaniards, not technically Christopher Columbus himself, but the Spaniards brought disease to the Americans, and such as syphilis, the plague, uh, smallpox. All these things that the Native Americans had no immunity to, and this is what wiped out like a big chunk of indigenous people. So it sucks, but you can't really blame, Christopher Columbus for the diseases that the Europeans brought to North America. I mean, he was kind of a part of it, but it wasn't intentional. And I think what we need to remember is Christopher Columbus was not a conqueror. He was not a conquistador. He was a navigator. He was a sailor. Far as I know, he never fired a gun. He could have. He could have practiced sword fighting, but he wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a general. He didn't conquer anything. So I'm going to put a link to the video that these people made about Christopher Columbus and the lies that they were spreading and the ignorance, the hate. So that's it. That's basically the video. 1492, Christopher Columbus stumbled upon an island, and oops, it was completely by accident. He was looking for India. Yes, him doing that set off a chain of events that ended up being bad for the North Native Americans. But think of it this way. You can't blame Christopher Columbus for what happened to the North Americas no more than you can blame the person who discovered opium for all the drug cartels, gang members shooting each other up, the drug addiction. You can't blame them for that. They had nothing to do with it. They discovered opium, which would eventually become heroin and all this other stuff. But the thing to remember, opium was medically necessary in order to perform surgery on people. If you want to pull a tooth, if you want to chop someone's hand off, or chop their leg off, or the foot off, or you want to pull a bullet out of someone, you needed opium to do that. Opium was the only effective painkiller could be used to perform these, surgeries. So opium is a good thing. Heroin is not. Opium is still addictive. You should be careful with it. But we still use opium and opiates today to block pain. And, I was on opiates to have my surgery done to rebuild my eardrum. I'm happy for that. You just got to be careful with it. But I can't blame the guy for that discovered opium, whoever he was, for the junkies shooting up in the back alley and the gang members having turf wars and shooting at each other to get a monopoly on the drug trade. They had nothing to do with that. You got to blame those people. You got to blame the drug dealers and the gang members and the drug cartels. You got to blame for the Native Americans, the British, the white Americans. You got to blame them for what happened to the Native Americans. And it sucks. It happens in history. It's been happening in Europe for thousands of years. The Romans and the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons and the Romans and the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons, Gaul, the Gothics, the Franks. It's been happening in Asia forever. We don't have a whole lot of written history about North America, South American stuff, and it happening over here, but I'm sure it happened. It's just that the thing that with the Native Americans in North America is just very, very recent. That's the only reason why we're still talking about it today. Well, we still talk about Europe and stuff and all those battles and stuff, but it happens. It's part of history. It's part of it. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it happens. And if you're gonna hate on someone, hate on the right guy. I'm not saying you should hate. You shouldn't hate people. You shouldn't hate people at all. But if you're gonna hate someone, hate the right people. Don't destroy someone else's good name just because you don't know history. So that's it. I'm Asatsu 5, and I'm out.